I am Klaus Lackner, the inventor of synthetic trees.
Klaus Lackner is a geophysicist at Columbia University. He's teamed up with Alan Wright at Global Research Technologies in Tucson.
I'm kind of the wrench turner guy.
Together, they've created this machine. It may not look like a tree, but it's designed to do the same thing: absorb carbon dioxide from the air.
The wind comes in carrying natural and man-made CO2, and the air coming out has been scrubbed of much of its CO2.
A 40-foot container-sized module will capture a ton of CO2 in a day. So one of these modules will do in one day what the average tree is going to take a century to do.
The secret is in the material in these sheets or leaves. It's a secret Lackner and Wright won't reveal.
The material you see in here is a proprietary material we have developed for the purpose of collecting carbon dioxide. It has an affinity to CO2, but at the same time, this material doesn't bind the CO2 so tightly that it couldn't be easily removed.
As the air moves through this thing, over time that panel gets fully loaded with CO2, and then we're ready for a wash cycle.
The liquid you see is a sodium carbonate solution.
The fluid wets all those sheets and runs down and is collected at the bottom of the system in a tray.
The wash solution goes into a salt splitter, which separates out the carbon dioxide. This prototype of the synthetic tree is smaller than the units Wright and Lackner want to build.
We're looking at a module the size of a 40-foot shipping container. In 6 days, one of those units could collect the carbon dioxide that the normal automobile would produce in a year's driving.
But there are a lot of cars on the road, so they want to build a whole lot of trees.
30 million of those could collect 10 billion tons of CO2.
Lackner and Wright imagine parks of these trees. They hope to eventually pump the carbon dioxide they produce deep underground, where it will be safely stored. But that costs money. So in the meantime, they'll sell the CO2 to oil companies. They pump the gas into underground reservoirs, where it expands, pushing up more oil into depleted wells.
In the short term, we have the ability to inject it into oil wells, and at that point, the CO2 actually has value.
They got the idea of selling to oil companies from another carbon capture technology called carbon sequestration. CO2 is captured at power plants before it's emitted into the air, then piped to oil wells.
If we're going to continue to use fossil fuels as the main source of energy, then we're going to have carbon sequestration.
We work on processes to convert this yard trash and shredded wood into automotive fuel.
His secret is a radical new way of making ethanol. It's called cellulosic ethanol. In recent years, ethanol has been billed as the great green hope to replace petroleum. People all over the world are growing their fuel. In France, ethanol is made from grapes. In America, from corn.
Today, corn is being used to produce about 5 billion gallons a year.
But ethanol has plenty of skeptics.
Basically, you don't want to need so much biofuel that you would end up competing with food crops.
In January 2007, thousands of Mexicans took to the streets to protest against the rocketing cost of corn tortillas, a staple food.
Are we creating a situation where people are enjoying a luxury of travel at the expense of people who just need a basic diet?
Lonnie Ingram wondered whether he could just use the inedible parts of plants to make ethanol.
Corn cobs and the corn stems and leaves could be used to make ethanol.
He was inspired by the mountains of plant waste in Florida. Lawn clippings, orange rinds, sugarcane stalks. Floridians are practically swimming in the stuff.
These are piles of wood waste, yard waste from Gainesville, Florida.
In America, 1 billion tons of woody biomass is produced every year.
In the conversion of woody biomass into ethanol, there was a problem, and that problem was with the many different types of sugars that are present.
Corn kernels contain a single type of easily digestible sugar. But the other types of sugars in woody biomass are tougher to break down, although not impossible. After much trial and error, Lonnie Ingram discovered the secret.
We started with E. coli, an organism which is present and an integral part of our digestive process.
Left alone, E. coli bacteria turned cellulose into worthless lactic acid. But Ingram was able to tweak nature. He added 2 genes to the E. coli bacterium and transformed it into an efficient fuel-making machine.
This is the organism we developed. This same organism can use those sugars and convert those into ethanol. These thick colonies of E. coli on this plate are fermenting as we speak.
Now a genetically enhanced version of the same bacteria that help us digest our food turns stalks and leaves into a renewable fuel.
Each dry ton of this material can be converted into 50 to 100 gallons of ethanol.
Woody biomass could replace 35% of our automotive fuel without affecting the food supply. A new plant in Jennings, Louisiana is already up and running and can make up to 113 million litres of ethanol every year. And more facilities are on the way.
This can help. This can make a large contribution.
Today's cars are big, fast and powerful. But when it comes to fuel efficiency, the numbers don't add up.
As a physicist, I've been wondering why our cars use about 1/3% of their fuel energy to move the driver.
It turns out that nearly 90% of the energy in your fuel is never transferred to the tires. So where does all this energy go?
It's lost in the engine, idling, drivetrain, and accessories.
Amory Lovins and his green team at the Rocky Mountain Institute set to work.
There's so much waste out there today that we do feel smarter design and technologies can radically reduce that waste.
They wanted to create a new, super efficient car, but they didn't want to make it too small.
If you do that, the vehicles actually become less safe, and they also become less desirable for, let's say, American consumers that have large families.
But how can you cut waste without cutting size?
I started thinking about that whole new design space of combining ultralight, ultra-low drag with hybrid. That turned into the hypercar concept.
They looked at every aspect of the car with fresh eyes.
Big factor is the air conditioning unit. In fact, in some cars, the air conditioning unit is sized to be able to cool an Atlanta house in the summer.
Like a green home, their car uses insulation and double-glazed windows.
Part of the issue with these efficient vehicles is they have to be designed to maximize integration. If we can actually make the car lighter, we require a smaller powertrain. We require a smaller engine. We require fewer batteries.
But the biggest fuel savings come, ironically, from a material familiar to the racing car industry: carbon fiber.
Carbon fiber has 10 times the strength of steel.
And it weighs half as much. Today's car frames are made up of hundreds of parts, which add weight and decrease fuel efficiency. The hypercar frame is comprised of only 14 parts, which can snap together.
And this structure makes it immensely stiff and strong, and yet very light.
There is a widespread perception that lighter vehicles are less safe. That perception, we feel, is wrong. A lighter weight car is going to accelerate better, is going to handle better, and is going to brake shorter than a heavier car.
They reduce fuel loss even more by tucking in the side mirrors and making the tires out of a stiffer material. That minimizes flexing, which eats fuel. They even cut weight in the headlights. The result?
The next generation hypercar, a vehicle that is lightweight and has plug-in hybrid capability that we think will get to market in 3 to 5 years.
It will handle 5 adults in comfort. It'll haul a half-ton up a 44% slope. Very brisk acceleration, 0 to 60 in about 7 or 8 seconds.
It's an SUV that can go more than 100 kilometers on 2.4 liters of fuel. Now car makers are calling Amory Lovins.
You say, well, we wanted to make this car in the first place. Now we see a way to do it. Let's get together.
The hypercar puts gas guzzlers to shame. In fact, it's so efficient, it doubles as a rolling power station.
Your car is going to be sitting there with potentially a considerable amount of stored energy. And at that time, it might be more efficient to take that energy and provide it back into the grid.
How does that work? The fuel-efficient hypercar has energy to spare. So every day, the surplus energy could be sold back to the power company, who could reimburse you at the end of the month. In this way, one of our biggest fuel problems, the car, becomes a potential fuel solution.
Our cars represent a much larger power source, actually, than the electricity grid. It shows the revolutionary potential of these new cars to provide energy in ways we've never thought of before.